Hello YouTubers, Z8 Eldred here. Today I decided to do a video on how to set up a rear derailleur. I had done a video earlier on how to adjust the rear derailleur, but this time I'm gonna start from scratch in how you start after installing the derailleur on a frame, how you start before you even attach the cable and so forth. So this is more thorough than just the adjustment, because if this is not done right, your adjustments will not work out. So I'm going to move the camera over here. Okay, that's where we're going to be working for the most part. Let me get it as close as I can so you can see what I'm doing. Get the right vantage point. The rear derailleur here. Okay. So, this is a Campagnolo Super Record rear derailleur, and I want to kind of start from just stating that this particular derailleur uses a Torx 25, but other derailleurs can use like a 4mm or even a 5. I think they're mostly 4, but basically they're attached to the dropout of any frame. This is the dropout down here, and it's already attached. Basically, you attach it. You don't need a torque wrench. You put that in there. You turn it till it stops. Once that's attached, your cable, basically the assumption is your cable's already been run from the shifters, and it runs down here through the back of the derailleur. That's where this instructional video begins. I'm going to focus on how you adjust everything before you attach the cable and how you adjust after you attach the cable. So you can see that the cable is loose. This is where we're going to attach it to the derailleur here. I'm going to leave it loose because the first thing you need to do is to adjust your limit screws. Now on the Campagnolo, the limit screw is a hex. This is a 2mm tool that goes in the top of the limit screw. The limit screw on the right adjusts for your hard gears. The limit screw on the left adjusts the limit on your low gears closer to the wheel. So I'm going to you start with the gear closer to your frame, the adjustment closer to your frame, because you want to make sure that this chain does not jump in between your cassette and the frame. That's the first thing you got to do. So what I like to do, the cable's loose, you mounted this. Now, what I want to show is, as I adjust the limit screw, I'm going to turn it. You see that movement right there? This is moving. Let me put my hand over here, my finger. Look right over here, and you can see that movement. So basically, you want to make sure under here, you look under here, you want to make sure that this movement puts the chain line directly in line with the sprocket, the last sprocket, your biggest ratio in the back, which is the smallest cog physically, the smallest physical cog. This movement is what you're adjusting with that screw. You can see the derailleur move all the way over. And I'm going to bring it back. Bring it back. You see it's coming all the way to touch the dropout. That's what you're trying to mess with. You want to make sure that that is directly below this sprocket. Okay. So that's the theory I wanted to talk about. Now let me move this over here and we'll talk about the practical side of what I really do and how I adjust it. Move this over, let's see. Okay, I think that's good there. Okay, so what I do is I use my ears. You know, it's good to look at what I just showed you, make sure it's lined up, but then you want to follow up and verify it by listening. So now it's lined up from what I showed you. So I'm going to turn the crank arm. And you got to make sure that the chain, the front derailleur, I'm going to move it over a little bit, like you're shifting to the big chain ring. I'm going to click it a couple of times because when the chain is all the way down here, it rubs on the cage. So that gets rid of the rubbing. And so what I want to do now, move the camera over here. I want to listen You hear that? That little tick. That tells me, even though I looked at it, it's not quite there. So now I'm going to adjust that noise away. As I turn, you hear that? Got quieter. I'm turning it counterclockwise. Counterclockwise moves it towards the dropout. If I turned it clockwise, let me show you. I turn it clockwise. You hear that? It went to the next cog. So if you had a 12, now it's in your 13. Like I have a 12 on here. If you had an 11, it will not be in your 12. Without shifting, I use that to just to show you. So I'm going to go counterclockwise, which basically brings it towards the dropout this way. So I'm doing counterclockwise. You will hear it rubbing. Hear that? There. There. And you want that to be quiet. Regardless of what you looked at when I showed, sometimes it doesn't quite, it doesn't quite dial it in. So you use your ears. And all I did was once it dropped, I moved this over a quarter turn after it dropped. Just to make sure. In this position now, you know that it will never jam between the cog and your frame. And with an 11 speed, the risk of that happening is not as much as with a 9 or a 10 because there's not that much space there anyway. But if that does happen, it can really tear up your dropout. It can mess up your derailleur. So you really don't even want to mess around with that. You got to make sure this is dialed in. This is before. So now, you hear how quiet that is. That's how you know that's adjusted. There's no rubbing or anything. Okay. So now, if you don't adjust that properly, everything else you do will be for naught. After you do that now, you take your cable, because you've set the limit screw, the outer limit screw. And now all I do is I pull the cable a little bit to make sure it's taut. I don't use any third hand brake tool and all of that. Let me come over on this side. I don't use any third hand brake tool. A lot of times I just pull it by hand. Okay, I'm gonna even put this down. Now, before I do that though, what I do is I make sure that the barrel adjuster on the frame, I'm gonna pan the camera here, just to make sure I want to cover everything so there's no questions. There are barrel adjusters on the frame. The barrel adjuster here for the rear derailleur allows you to make fine adjustments on the road, if something is off or whatever else. What I do with my barrel adjuster is, since I know I'm going to adjust it perfectly back here, I wind it all the way down to where it stops, to where it's completely loose. Then I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So about 5 clicks. Now I know I'm in the middle of my adjustment range up here, so I can go down if the cable is too tight, or I can go up if the cable is loose. Or if it comes loose, like if it settles on a new cable and so forth. So you want to keep your barrel adjuster in the middle, so where you got adjustments in both directions. You do that, then you want to make sure, let me pan to the shifters. You want to make sure that your shifter is all the way. I'm basically pushing on the shifter, even though the cable is not tight. I want to make sure I've put it in the position for this gear, meaning the largest ratio and the smallest physical cog. You want to make sure you've clicked all the way to where it's in that position up here. Otherwise, if you do the adjustment, it will be off and you'll have to do it over again. So make sure you click your shifter to where, if you were shifting, it would be in the position where the chain is in the back right now. So I've clicked it, it doesn't move it, there's no clicks there anymore. And now I can come back over here. All I do, because before I did this now, you also want to make sure your barrel adjuster near the derailleur here is loosened all the way to where you can only tighten. Because I'm doing it by hand, I'm not pulling the cable, so I know I will need to tighten. So I loosen it all the way, and that way I just pull it by hand, put the cable in place, and tighten this nut. This is a 5mm nut. And you don't need to torque it too much. All I'm doing here is I'm holding the derailleur because I don't want any pressure on it. And I'm just making sure that that nut does not move. So I'm not allowing the derailleur to do that. So I'm holding the derailleur so it doesn't do that, so that I actually tighten the nut with no pressure on the whole derailleur. So I hold the derailleur, the nut doesn't move anymore. And all I'm using is my index finger and my thumb. I'm not using my hand. You don't need to get all crazy. There's no pressure on that thing. Once it's tight, you can go in anywhere. So now your cable's tight. So now you can start trying to shift. So after tightening the cable, what we want to do now is we want to check the indexing. So we're going to take it out of, we're going to shift to, I usually go to like the 4th cog, but we're just going to see how it works. 1, 2, right there is hesitating. I'm going to go ahead and adjust the tension here, because remember I had loosened this all the way. So I'm going to tighten it a little bit, 1/4 turn here, 1/2 a turn, it moved over, nice and quiet. I'm going to go back down again to this 12, and I'm going to go back, click, move, click, 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 click. I like that. Now on the end here, it won't even go all the way into my last cog. And that's actually good. I do that out of habit. I usually wind the outer limit, or actually I think it's the inner limit, to where this thing will not run the risk of jumping into my wheel before I've adjusted it. Because if it gets between there, it can be expensive and it's dangerous. If you're riding and it jams in there, it can cause you to crash depending on how hard you're going. But it can also ruin your spoke. Even if you don't crash, it can jam in there and break your spoke. And it can be expensive. So once I'm installing a derailleur, the first thing I do is wind in that limit screw for the one up here to where it stops. I go about 3 or 4 turns, and that's what I've done. So now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to back off that limit screw to allow it to shift. I'm going to go about a full turn and see what that does. You can hear it making a lot of noise because I had clicked for that position. Now you see it got there, but it's still jumping around. You can see that. Look at that. It's still coming back down, which is good. That's what I want. So I'm gonna back it off. There. It's sitting down a little bit. Still a little noisy. You still hear that little tick. Back it off. There. It's a little bit noisy. There we go. That's what I want. That's what I want. I mean, there are other things you could do. You can get behind this and look to see if it lines up. But I like to do it to where I'm listening to it and I control how far. Now you want to make sure that after you do the first adjustment, this inner guy here is set correctly. You can hear a little noise there, a little bit of a flicking tick. That's okay. That's a good thing. That means that it's not quite there. So what you want to do is you want to back off. You back off by going counterclockwise. You're loosening to go towards the wheel. And there, it got quieter. I went a 1/4 turn. And listen, it's a little quieter. I'm going to try another 1/4 turn. There. That's what you want. No ticking, no jumping. I'm going to leave the tool there. And what I do is I go down through the gears. A little bit of ticking. I'm going to do a half. I do them in 1/4 turn. 1/4 turn increments. Go down. When you're shifting, a click should give you a cog. Basically, if you watch, I'm going to move the camera so you can see what I'm talking about. I'll move the camera behind here so you can see the chain jumping on the cog. So as I shift, let's move it down. Let me focus on that cog. There we go. I want you to see, I'm going to give you, so as I shift, basically, this is noisy. Let me move that over a little bit. Okay. When I shift, let me go back and try it so I can tell you. That's the tool that just fell out of there. Okay. Click, 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 click. That's what you want. You don't want any delays. You want your shifting to be, each click should move to a cog with no rubbing. Click, 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 click. That little rubbing you hear is when it comes to the 12 and the small. You never should ride small, small anyway. That's what the rubbing is. I'll move it a little bit just to show you the few clicks I'm talking about. So here we go. From the 12 to the 13, click, instant. 13 to the 14, click, instant. That's the way your gears should shift. If it's not shifting like that, something's wrong with your setup. Because when you're riding on the road, you don't want to wait. When you think about it, as soon as you click that thing, it needs to get where you want it to go. I'm going to put that on the derailleur right there. Okay. So now, you want to go through, once you've done your preliminary stuff, just go through your gears. And you see how I got on the back there? Quiet. And push your shifter all the way and see if it rubs. See if you hear the spoke rub on the rollers. Because if you have it too loose and if it's not set right, it can touch the spoke and then the spoke will touch it. So I always go, after it shifts in there, I push on it harder to see. There should be no movement. And then you know you've got it right. Then you've got the limit screws. You can hear I'm on that thing pushing all the way, nothing. Sometimes I'll even push this. I'll push the derailleur a little bit to see if it will touch the spoke. That's how you know you got it right. And that's basically what it is. So that's your adjustment of the rear derailleur. So to summarize, after you set the outer limit screw without the cable being tightened, you want to make sure that you tighten the cable by hand, but you back off this barrel adjuster to where you can only tighten if you're going to pull it by hand. Because if you don't back it off, then it will go all the way up before you get shifting. So you want to back it off all the way to where it's completely loose. And you loosen you set your barrel adjuster up here on the frame, like I showed you. Let me go to the front. You set your barrel adjuster up here on the frame in the middle to where 4 or 5 clicks to where you have adjustments in either direction. Because now, when your cable settles or whatever, you can adjust from here. You can even adjust while you're riding. And that's the whole point of doing that. That's why they're there. So basically, you set the adjustment here. You go ahead and pull that by hand. Loosen this first, pull that by hand, tie the nut down. Then you tighten this to get your shifting, because initially, even if you pull it by hand, it has no trouble jumping from the biggest ratio or the smallest cog to the next one. And then you think, oh, I'm good. No, it's when you start going to the 14 and the 15 and you start having trouble. So what I usually do is I go 1, 2, 3. If those 3 clicks are fine, then I know I'm good. And what happened in this video here, by the 3rd click, it was hesitating. And all I did was I tightened this one. So you tighten going against the clock to tighten. That's the same thing I covered in the adjustment. So basically you're at a point where you're adjusting now because you've already set your limits. So you tighten by going against the clock. You loosen by going with the clock. You tighten to get your chain to jump up towards smaller ratios but larger cogs. You loosen this to get the chain to come back down if it's hesitating. But usually if you get rid of the noise in these gears, all the other ones work. If your frame is aligned and you don't have any kind of problem. And the reason why I mentioned that is, if you go through all of this that you just saw here, and you're still having major shifting problems, it is possible that the derailleur could be bent. You know, if it's not a new derailleur, it could be. That's why most riders don't place the bike on the derailleur side. We don't let anything touch our derailleurs. So the derailleur could be bent, or the dropout could be bent, or the frame could not be straight or aligned. So usually they have a tool that you can use. I mean, I'd have to do a different video for that, but if you're still having those kind of problems, stop by the LBS. They have a tool that they can stick in here and check, and check to see if your alignment is in place. They will basically go around the wheel and make sure everything's aligned, because if it's not aligned, the indexing won't work. But that's extreme. That's if you've fallen or had a crash, or you know, you got a used bike that you don't know the condition. But I just want you to know, if you go through all these steps and you're still having hesitation, it could be that, or it could be old cables, you know, the housing maybe seizing, a different thing, you know. So that's where you start looking. So don't question yourself. If you've gone through what you've seen in this video and you're still having trouble, then you start looking at the cables and the alignment of the frame and the condition of the rear derailleur and all that. But what you've seen here today, you saw it real time. I'm basically setting it up on my own bike, and I will be riding tomorrow morning. So that's how you adjust a rear derailleur. That's how you set up and adjust a rear derailleur. So I hope this has been helpful, and stay tuned to the channel for more content.